like to welcome all of you here today, and we thank you very much for your interest in our speaker series. Today's event is the last of 3 speaker series which we held this past year, sponsored by the NYU Aging Incubator and featuring Tisch faculty. For those of you who are new to the incubator, the NYU Aging Incubator is an interdisciplinary university-wide partnership across all the various schools that was established early in 2017. So what you're really looking at is our inaugural year. The incubator seeks to facilitate the initiation of path-breaking interdisciplinary research programs, educational endeavors, and to improve and enhance the day-to-day lives of older adults and address the issues that are posed by an aging society. There are 3 co-directors to the incubator: Joshua Chodosh from the Langone School of Medicine, Bei Wu from NYU Myers College of Nursing, and myself, Victoria Ravis. I'm at the College of Dentistry and Global Public Health. Together as a network, we share a broad range of interests and diverse connections. Our partnership with Tisch is a bit unique in that what we thought it would do is allow us to start highlighting and facilitating a conversation that will bring different perspectives to aging, break down stereotypes of what it means to age, and showcase both the value and the opportunity of an extended lifespan. We are pleased to have Christopher Chan Robertson here today to introduce our guest of honor, Carlos de Jesus and Nova Scott James. Christopher Chan Robertson is a 15-year veteran editor, a digital content strategist, a cinematographer, a college professor, and a project manager. He's been teaching cinematography and editing at the Tisch School of the Arts since 1999 and has served as NYU's executive director of post-production for over 2 years. Currently, he's also the freshman area head. So please welcome Christopher.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. I am very happy to be introducing Carlos de Jesus and Nova Scott James this evening. The speaker series will facilitate conversations that highlight aging from different perspectives, and today Carlos and Nova will be exploring intergenerational perspectives on aging. I'm very happy to present Carlos and Nova because of my relationship to Carlos and Nova. Carlos was my teacher when I was in high school back in 1994. I was a teacher of Nova when she was in high school, and my age kind of falls in between the two of them to a degree. I think you take Nova's age, double her age, you get my age, double my age, you get Carlos's age. So there's all sorts of exponents and math going on. When you look at intergenerational perspectives, you have the youth, and on the opposite side of the spectrum, you have elders, and elders are often tasked with being a mentor to those that are younger. And I think that's one of the reasons why Carlos is such a wonderful teacher, that taking on mentorship is second nature for him, because mentorship involves storytelling. It's the contextual sharing of information, of experiences, of history. Carlos, as a storyteller and teacher, expresses himself through photography, film, and writing. He's an associate professor at Tisch School of the Arts, New York University, and is a key participant on the First World Order Project, a long-term telecommunications project that focuses on traditional as well as contemporary expressions of African cultural practice through the Americas, Caribbean, Europe, India, and Pacific Islands. Being in Carlos's classroom, being a co-teacher with him, it's always been wonderful to hear the anecdotes come from him traveling. And I think an ethos of Tisch is learning by doing. And if you're going to be an artist of the world, you need to know the world, and the world doesn't come to you, you got to go to it. So it's always wonderful to hear about Carlos being a traveler or being an explorer. Travel is essential, listening to other stories is essential, expression through art, history as a canvas. It's in Carlos's work and his storytelling, the notion of culture, of different cultures, of learning through each other's cultures. I've had the pleasure of teaching with Carlos for over 20 years. Stories have come up many times over those years, some of them the same stories, but I can tell you with with great pleasure that hearing a story I've heard before is like meeting an old friend, that these stories have legs, that they have value, that they have all sorts of understanding to not only to the history, but to Carlos as a person and his sensibilities and what he relates to. So it's that kind of anecdotal teaching I learned from him. I try to bring it to my own teaching. I certainly see it in Nova's teaching and her work. Nova Scott James is a filmmaker, artist, and community organizer from Harlem. Her work explores themes of individual and collective memory and trauma, surrealism, death, ritual, and healing. Nova is an adjunct instructor at the NYU Tisch School of the Arts, teaching in special programs, including the Future Filmmaker Workshop. That's where I first met Carlos. That's where I first taught Nova. Future Filmmaker really was a wonderful opportunity because you have such wonderful teachers come in as storytellers, and then they pass the mic on to you. So the idea that you become a listener and then a storyteller is so exciting because you get to be an active participant in the world around you. You get to contribute to the stories that other people tell, and that's very empowering. I think sometimes when you take away people's ability to tell stories, there's a dehumanization that goes on. The more we learn about people, the more we can understand humanity and humans. Whereas I think Carlos, his wonderful travels has taken him around the world. I know that Nova is traveling as well. To borrow a page literally from Shelley's book, I find that Nova's journeys are inverted odysseys, so to speak, that her work is, like I said before, dealing with memory, surrealism, death. You don't often hear young people talk about these things. These are normally people that are elders that are reflecting upon things. So to see that in her work is quite mature. To see that in her teaching is quite mature. In Nova's teaching, what I so wonderfully enjoy is that besides teaching to the head and the heart, she's interested in the soul of the student, in the spirituality. And a lot of elder faculty and seniors can't even grasp that concept. So again, to see her work with a student holistically and find out where it resonates with them culturally or spiritually or just how they feel is such a wonderful thing. And certainly I can contribute that back to the environment that was established in Future Filmmaker Workshop, thanks to Carlos. Again, with Nova's work, two of her short films, Handmade and Thamaga and My Third Eye, have premiered at the Film Society of Lincoln Center and New York African Film Festival 2015-2017, respectively. To name a few of Carlos's work, The Devil is a Condition, Garifa Nation, That Old Gang of Mine, was broadcast on 13 WNET in 1996. His most recent artist book is In the Knot of Time, which was released in 2015, and his photography and video project Amanye What's New was exhibited at the NYU Kimmel Center windows in 2017. These two speakers are wonderful, fascinating storytellers, wonderful artists and filmmakers, and we're all in for a treat this evening. It's my pleasure to introduce Carlos de Jesus and Nova Scott James.
What he's left out is that he beats me up quite often. That's one of those intergenerational phenomenon that the young come and beat up the elders at some point. What I'd like to do is simply present this project that as Chris said, was exhibited at the Kimmel Windows back in September, and then have this generate a kind of a Q&A, and then I can go deeper into the background behind this story. Thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
However, before we screen it, what I'd like to briefly say is that what we're about to see is the archival material which I gathered in Ivory Coast, West Africa, some 35 years ago. And the formats were Polaroid. There was no digital then, but Polaroid film, 35 millimeter still transparencies, and Super 8 films, all analog. That's what we're about to see. And also, I'd like to explain that the title Amanye, What's New, in Agni, the language spoken in Ivory Coast, Amanye, it's a greeting, what's new, it's a greeting, what's new, Amanye. It also includes the sharing of dreams, and I think that that's super important when we get into the cultural, and I think that some of that will come through in the presentation. So without further ado, why don't we go ahead and present this, then we can have a Q&A, and then we can also watch some works from the Future Filmmakers Workshop, which is, as far as my teaching here at NYU, over 30 years, it truly, truly, truly is my favorite class to teach. And you'll probably see why through the work of the kids' work that's made when they're 16, 17 years old. Okay, so. let's see.
So as we go into this, we'll just ask that you take in the work and we'll talk about it after and reflect on what you see and your own dreams as well. And then feel free to share. So we're going to cut the lights.
Set to go? Can we all read that text okay from where you are? Because otherwise I can read over it. We're okay?
If you read too, it's nice.
Hmm?
If you want to read, it would be nice as well.
No, it's okay. I'd rather present it, let people read it. It has more of a surreal quality to it.
the lights on?
So should I just close this now?
Hello. You can leave it. Let's pull up a nice image.
It is?
Well, let's pull one up. There we go. Intergenerational aging, right there. Yeah. So first, I want to share that. So personally, ever since I was a child, I spent a lot of time reflecting on death and what death was, and not always in any sort of like gruesome or dark way, but just a curiosity. And there's the composer Clint Mansell. There's a song. It's called "Death Is a Road to Awe," and I do like the song, but more than that, I love the title. And in a similar vein, there's also Deepak Chopra said once that death is a creative opportunity. And I love that too. And so in the images and the photos, there's a striking perspective on aging and community and death in terms of the deaths that happen in the village and the response, and the celebration and the embrace that happens. And so that really, in viewing this, the first time I viewed it at Kimmel, and then time since then really warms my heart. And I appreciate that perspective, and I think it's one that in the West we don't often experience.
Right, yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, us in the West, so that in that context, I'd like to hear from the audience how we responded. Here we are, we're all from the West, how we responded to these images, because I think that on some level, in my mind, when I presented this at Kimmel, and even now as I present it here, I think that it is an encounter of two worlds, and how exactly, where exactly is the meeting point between these two worlds? Or if I may, I have a quote here from Edouard Glissant, who says, let me see if I can find this quickly. These images of the landscape. The village became a common ground, a place, to paraphrase Edouard Glissant, where the thoughts of the world could meet other thoughts of the world. And then later, quoting Glissant again, he says, the project's purpose is to invite the viewer to share what Glissant called emotions of the diversity of the world. And so in that context, I'd like to open it up to you guys before we move on to the work of the youngsters and the future filmmakers.
I'll kick it off. Hello.
Yes.
What struck me about the funeral scenes was that they aren't all that different from our funerals.
Sorry?
They're not all that different from our funerals. I recently had a death in my family, and all the cousins and aunts and surviving aunts and uncles gathered around for 2 days before we went and buried my uncle. And while we didn't sing and dance the way the locals in this film did, we did have our own rituals associated with it that went over 3 days. And I was struck by the similarities of the two.
Cool. And when you say our funerals, is that from a particular cultural perspective?
The Catholic cultural perspective of a couple of days of waking and then a funeral mass followed by the burial is what I meant, yeah.
I noticed there was a certain amount of white face or white on the faces and wondered if it symbolized those who had died and gone to the ancestors who came back to share in this funeral.
Um,
One person with completely white face, you know, some kind of
Right.
what,
Well, it's possible that that's connected to the funeral rites, but more so than that, without the funeral rites, it's used more for the heat, because it's very
Oh,
hot.
okay.
So it's a way of, I don't know what exactly what is that product that they put on their face, but I think it's more for the heat and the sun. Yeah,
okay, misreading.
yeah, yeah.
Would you share with us,
I'd
Carlos?
like to- Yeah, oh,
Mhm.
yes.
I
Please.
just wanted to ask you to say a little bit more about Claude and his grandmother and that whole situation that really is the reason why you and Claude went to Africa, because I think it really, speaking of generational things and people looking for their ancestors, I mean, this begins there, goes to France and comes back, and I think it's really good to talk about
Yeah,
that.
that's an interesting background to the whole experience. Claude, I mean, we do mention Nana says my grandson found me, etc. But the background to that is that Claude, my colleague, and now I'm his daughter's godfather way back then. But as a teenager, Claude, as most teenagers, is rummaging around the different closets in the house in Paris, and he sees a birth certificate of his mother, the birth certificate of his mother, that indicates that she was born in what was then French colonial West Africa. It wasn't Ivory Coast yet, French colonial West Africa. Now then, as a young adult, he marries and decides to go on his honeymoon to make a tour of Francophone countries in Africa. And then remembers that as a teenager, he had found this birth certificate of his mother and decided that he would like to visit the place that was listed on the birth certificate where she was born, because up to that time, no one he growing up had no indication that his mother had anything to do with Africa, that his grandfather, nothing, absolutely nothing having to do with Africa except that what was listed on this birth certificate. So when he arrives at what is now Ivory Coast, he goes to the town or the city that was listed on the birth certificate and arrives there and is so disappointed because it was a ghost town with just bramble bush, like in our West, bramble bush running through the streets, wooden houses just tilting over, nothing, absolutely nothing there. So he returns to Abidjan, the capital of now Ivory Coast, and decides to go to the university to ask if they could give him more information of this place that is now a ghost town and where his mother was born. And they don't have any information for him, but they tell him that the president's right-hand man at the time, living in Abidjan, was the chief of the village that was also listed where his mother was born, and that he was very accessible, this man, the right-hand man to the president. So he calls the man up, and the man says, oh yes, by all means, come for lunch tomorrow. So he arrives and he shows the man the birth certificate, and the man says, yes, I am the chief of the village, and guess what? Your grandmother is still alive. And tomorrow I will send you with my chauffeur to the village. And that's how the whole story begins. And he arrives, and here's his grandmother, who had lost all touch with that, as I listed here. She was taken to Paris when she was 2 years old, raised as a French woman. And I met her, I was very close to her, and she kind of maybe a little lighter than I am, but I never would have associated her with any African anything other than. And so yes, Claude arrives with the chauffeur, and what was that for? For 3 days and 3 nights, just the return of the long-lost son. The grandmother had not heard from any part of this family in 65 years. Yes. Yep. Did that answer your question? By the way, before I lose track of, I don't know if any one of us in the audience remembers, because I want to get back to this title of Amanye, What's New? And for President Clinton's first inaugural address, the poet laureate was Maya Angelou. And I don't recall the exact title of the poem that she wrote and read, but I do remember that the poem ends with the advice. She says, the next time you say good morning, mean it. And that always struck me, and it stayed with me, because I'm thinking of my experience here. Most of us, we run into the elevator, people say, oh, good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. But why did she feel called upon to tell us that the next time we said it, to mean it? And of course, now in the context of this title, this greeting, Amanye, that it also includes the sharing of dreams, and I can get back to that if we have, I can expand on that story and that experience if you'd like, but I don't know.
Would you share with us maybe any recent dreams for you that are on the surface, or
My recent
you can think about it if you want, and maybe someone here has a dream that they'd like to share what's new for them.
Well, why don't I expand on this greeting, because I found this very, very striking. That the village of Abi is no more than 10 blocks long and 3 blocks wide while I was there. And I'm sure that it still is, because when I had the exhibit here, I had a man looking at the exhibit, and I stood by him, and I knew that he was an African man, and we started talking, and I mentioned to him that yes, that I had taken these images, and he says, he was a young African man. And I said, I took these images like 35 years ago, and he says, it's still the same. It's still the same. I said, oh, that's interesting. But in any event, this greeting, Amanye, what's new? I'd be walking around the village taking pictures, and I run into you on this, and you say Amanye, and I'll say, oh, well, I just left the house and I'm going over to the beach to film some of the kids, et cetera, and you tell me exactly where you're going, right? And I leave you, and I come back from the beach. An hour later, I run into you again, and you ask me, what's new? And I ask you, and I tell you, well, I was at the beach, and this went on. Every time I run into you, the greeting is Amanye, okay? So, one morning, early, 4:30 in the morning, I woke up early because I wanted to make sure that I caught Grandma as she was going out into the forest to gather her herbs and other items, right? Because there were no clocks, other than, no clocks, no watches or anything else, nothing. We went by, if we make an appointment, we make one appointment in the morning, one appointment in the afternoon. And I said, yeah, by then I knew, whoa, okay, so I better make sure that I catch Grandma. I'm going to sit outside her hut. 4:30 in the morning, I'm heading down the hill from where I was staying, down to Grandma's hut. And I run into you somehow walking up the hill. And you ask me, what's new? And I'm saying, man, if I have to start explaining to you that I want to make sure that I don't miss Grandma. And I say, nothing, absolutely nothing is new, nothing is new. And the man says to me, you had dreams, didn't you? And I said, oh, now that you mention it, yes, I had these very strange dreams. Well, I missed Grandma while I was explaining my dreams. So, very important. very important, this back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, because that coupled with, as we read here, before the deceased can leave and buried, etc., we have to, the wife or the husband has to reveal all of the secrets that existed between the husband and wife before the deceased, to purify the soul of the deceased, etc., etc. So that, with any number of other little facets to this paradigm that goes to make up this village, creates an atmosphere of transparency to the extent that when the poet here, Ebony, some of his poetry, that excerpts that I wrote up here, he actually translated the interviews that we did in Agny way back then, and when Claude sent me the transcript of what he had translated from the different interviews, and I read the transcript, and I got so pissed off at Claude because I said, wait a minute, people don't talk this way. And it took me a while to realize that yes, they talk this way, because in that, well, I think that, perhaps I'm speculating on this, but that when you're constantly having to speak the kind of a truth, it becomes poetry. The language becomes poetry. So anyway, I'm just throwing that out now, just possibly for further discussion.
I'd love to add on that too. As Chris mentioned earlier or touched on, but the way that Carlos teaches is very poetic, and sort of, there's such an air of poetry and attention to detail that is clear in this project, and I think everyone that's studied with him would definitely say, and my creative and poetic sensibilities have really expanded due to those keen senses. So I appreciate that, and I want to ask, do you think if we adopted here, we have a very, what are the words? If we adopted this transparency and this poetry in the West or in New York City even, what could that look like, or what would be possible, or how could we do that?
I don't know. May I answer your question in another way, which is, and perhaps this might be a good segue, a good moment to show, remember the 50-second pieces, the primaries, and then also, do we have prom?
I believe so.
Because perhaps, yes, because what at the same time that the exhibit was up at Kimmel, maybe right after we did the Future Filmmakers Workshop in the spring, right? And I asked, because Future Filmmakers, we also do, over the course of 5-6 years, I've done a collaborative project with dramatic writing, the Department of Dramatic Writing at Tisch, and the dance department. And we do that like very quickly, one session to introduce the project, and then 1 hour for them to shoot. It's very, very quick. But I gave them the theme, what I felt was a theme here for Armagné: transparency, respect, transparency, and change. Respect, transparency, and change, which I don't know whether we gathered this from what I showed, right? From what we saw here. And then these are maybe 2 or 3 of the projects that we got from the kids. following that theme of respect, transparency, and change. Would that
Yeah.
be a good-
Well, they're at the end of the show, so maybe at the end we can show them and then watch some of the future filmmakers' coursework next. But what Carlos is speaking on, so there's a bigger project underway with Amanye to have people take videos, starting with our future filmmakers, students and alumni, about respect, change, and transparency as it relates to their individual communities, and that's, you know, up for interpretation. And I just think it's,
No, because I mean, I can answer your question in another way also. Okay, if you'd like.
whatever works. I just think, you know, what you're saying about these 50-second clips is really fascinating, and that there's a lot possible in terms of, you know, well, I'm asking you, how can we have more respect, change, and transparency in our communities? And so then the prompt for this project is to reflect on that and then show that with moving images, how respect, change, and transparency, where they're found and where you find them in your community. So, yeah.
But some of the responses that I got when the show was up, some of the responses. So I'll give you 2 responses. And one was from a man whom I know from the gym, from the sauna, strictly from the sauna at the YMCA. And when the show was up, I was on my way to the sauna, and I see him cooling off, practically stark naked, sitting outside the sauna room. And I start to go into the sauna, and I say, oh, I'd love to, and he is an African-American man, and from the few chats that we've had inside the sauna, I realized that he's had pretty much an experience like I've had growing up here in New York City. Right? He's my age as well, and not just his experiences growing up in New York City, and I have to say in the hood, and I won't get into what those experiences are like, but in the hood. And then also he was a teacher, kind of like me, et cetera, et cetera. And I see him sitting there, and I said, oh, I'd love for him to go to the Kimmels and see the show. And I happen to have had a flyer inside so I run back to the locker, I pick up a flyer, and the flyer just has that one image that I showed of her with the young man holding flowers. And that's what the flyer had, that one image. And I said to him, I said, listen, I'd love for you to go see this show. And he looks at the image, at the flyer, and he says to me, he says, who are these people? Pause. And I paused because I said, these people, it's only 2 people. What do you mean by these people? It's only this young man and the woman. And then he says, so again, it shocked me, who are these people? So I paused, and then he says, they look civilized. Pause. I don't say anything, and he says, they look innocent, with no ulterior motives. I said, wow, you got all that from that one image? I said, if I only had a reviewer from the New Yorker or the New York Times, and if that's all they wrote, I would feel vindicated by what I'd like to get across with this exhibit. Now, on the other hand, one day, because every other day I'd go and check the exhibit, and I run into a European woman whom I know, living at the Chelsea, and she teaches photography, et cetera, et cetera. And I run into her, and she says, oh, I saw your show, Carlos. I said, really? What did you think? She says, boy, aren't we lucky? And I said, what do you mean? She says, aren't we lucky that we don't live that way? So now, I related the same anecdote to my associate dean. She's she's African American from the Caribbean. And when I said to her, and he says they look civilized. She said, did he really say that? So I knew where she was coming from, because to say civilized and Tarzan and the jungle and the savages, and to say civilized. So was he saying that? But no, he was not saying civilized in that way. He was saying civilized like civilized, not that they're not savages, or that they're savages and now they have been civilized. No, they are civilized. Implying what? They're civilized and now we're living a whole other uncivilized behavior, right? And I can give many, many, many more anecdotes where this comes into play. Now, I ran into him just the other day, again, in the sauna, and I said to him, I quote you quite often. He said, you do? I said, yeah, remember when, and he remembered what he had said to me, and I said, yes, I quote you quite often. And then he said to me, he says, have you seen Gummo? Is anyone familiar with Gummo?
The harmony current. Oh, not
He's a rapper from the gangs and
Gummo.
Gummo.
No, I'm not familiar.
No one is familiar with Gummo? Okay, well, Gummo, and then also in the sauna, there's a man, he's kind of like an associate commissioner of the prisons in New York City, and he happened to be sitting there as well the other day when he said, what, Carlos, you haven't heard of Gummo? No. And he says, the commissioner of the prisons, he says, man, in the prisons, we simply do not have enough room to separate the gangs, the Bloods and the Crips. They just go stabbing and cutting each other. And the other fellow, who's not the commissioner, Gummo, I ran home to watch Gummo. And Shirley, you remember the other day I was watching? Gummo, he says, Gummo has received 300 million hits. 300 million hits on YouTube for this music video. I went home and I looked it up. It was total, what I would call total savagery. And Gummo is 300 million hits around the world. And what I saw were this music video. The guy, his hair is green and blue and machine guns, the top of a car, 300 pounds of marijuana. The idea here again is 300 million hits. So you ask me, how can we bring respect, transparency, and change? I don't think so. Not when this is what's being, what this is being projected around the world. I don't know. But it certainly is a far cry from this. And I even experienced it in the classroom with my freshman class when they have assignments. One young woman, she wanted to do a documentary assignment on consumerism. I said, great, that's great. Eventually she changed her mind. Oh, and when I showed this in the classroom, and she says, she happens to be Italian American, and she says, I understand it, but I get what this is about, but it doesn't speak to my experience. I said, and you want to do a documentary on consumerism and you can't see what relationship your documentary might have to do with this? Okay, I didn't say all this to her, but when I think of one of my hopes when I had the exhibit up was that the passers-by would look at this and perhaps make some connection to the chaos and the ephemerality, if you will, of the world that we live in here and this world. But I don't know, maybe some people got it, maybe some, I don't know. And I'm looking at the audience here now, and perhaps, do we see any of these connections? And I pass it back to you. Check out Gummo.
I think you guys should,
300 million hits around the world?
you guys should start a
And you're not
Steam,
the demo?
no, a sauna podcast. I think that would be a
Call it
hit.
on YouTube. Call it up now. No, not really.
Let's see.
Violence, no. The violence in our world today, I mean, I don't know.
Could I ask, how many people live in Abi?
How many people?
Live in Abi, the population of the town?
I don't know, like I said, the village is 10 blocks long by all measurements. I don't recall. You want me to take a wild guess?
Take a wild guess.
I don't know, 1,000,
Oh, 1,000, I see, that's a lot.
maybe?
Our apartment.
It's a wild guess.
Our apartment building has about 120. I visited my clan, I had visited my clan island in Scotland, in the Hebrides, and it's a little smaller than Manhattan, and it has the same number of people as in our apartment building, 120.
And you asked no one,
Pardon?
I'm saying, and you posed a question,
I'm not posing a question so much as what I really wanted to know is, could you tell us some of the dreams that are in the greeting? You said that they're inherent in the greeting, that tell me your dreams. And can you remember some of the dreams that the villagers told you? Are they similar
well,
to the
no,
dreams we had?
I never asked anyone to tell me their dreams.
Oh.
I never asked anyone, I mean,
Uh-huh.
Amanye, I went here, I did this, I
Yeah.
just came from here, I just came from there.
Okay.
But it was this one man who asked me, as I was heading down the hill.
Yes.
And I said, I don't have time, who asked me to tell him my dreams. And I said, well, yeah,
Oh.
well, and I told him my dream.
Do you remember what they were?
Oh, that I kept hearing these sounds, animal sounds, while I was asleep, and they would come up, and then they just, almost like and I guess they were kind of like crickets, but if not crickets, some kind of sound like that, and it would come up almost simultaneously, but simultaneously it would stop immediately, and it would come up, and then it would just stop immediately. And I said, no, those are odd sounds, and I don't know, stuff like that.
Thank you.
So I don't know if that answered.
I think so, yeah. I mean, yeah.
Because again, I have to keep putting this in the context of this, aside from the funeral rites that you say we have similar funeral rites, but aside from that, they're kind of the values that the society lives by. And I'm trying to think I'm trying to remember what other, I mean, I mentioned that, what other facets to the paradigm that might contribute to this transparency and respect and change, other than the two that I've just mentioned. Revealing all the secrets. Maybe something might come to me, I don't know.
I think I would love to encourage, just as I move about the world, more sharing of dreams amongst people. I think that would bring about more transparency and respect
But
to
we don't
connect
have
in
time.
that way.
We only have time to say good morning
Sure.
and mean it. You know,
Yeah.
we just do it as a matter of course. We enter the yellow, good morning,
Mm.
good morning. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Good morning.
It would require,
Someone asked me, I know in the past, a dean, one of the deans, and I attended a party, and he said, so how are you, Carlos? And I said, fine. He said, Carlos, I didn't ask you for all the gory details. I just, how are you? So what do they want? They don't really want the story. How are you? Well, fine, I'm fine. Same old. So you don't really mean it when you ask me, how are you? Because I'm about to tell you, but you don't really, right? So perhaps what we need is more dialoguing with each other.
yeah,
How do we bring about more dialogue? Well, we're too rushed to
yeah,
have a dialogue. We don't talk to each other. I said to my students the other day, you know what, really, the silence was deafening. in the classroom, just yesterday. Today's Wednesday, Tuesday, that's my class. And I said to the class, I says, you know, I don't get it. The silence in this classroom is deafening. Do you, and also you, it seems to me that you guys don't talk to, the students, you don't talk to each other in the classroom. You're on their cell phones. You're on their cell phones. And one young woman, the same Italian-American woman, she says, Carlos, we talk to each other. We don't. Well, you don't realize that. I mean, I've taught this course now at least 90 times, and I know the dynamics that I would get in the past, but now it just seems to be getting worse and worse and worse and worse from year to year.
The communication?
The communication is now,
Nice. Yeah, so they're talking to each other, but in a different way.
we're not dialoguing.
Right.
And how deeply can we go into these texts? I don't know. I mean, it's all, I don't know.
Right.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I was gonna say, funny enough, my grandmother on my father's side, she actually, how we usually conversate with my sister and myself when we call her is through dreams. So she plays a lot of lottery numbers, and her and my aunt's way of actually staying sharp and, you know, precise. They do this daily. This is a daily thing where they go and play numbers, and how they pick the numbers is through dreams. So what they'll do is, like, you know, ask people, what were your dreams? What did you dream about last night? What did you do? So usually when my sister and I first get on the phone with her, anytime we just want to chit chat, it's always like, what'd you dream up, girls? What happened? It doesn't even matter what it is. She could tell you blackboard. I'll say blackboard. She'll be like, oh, that's 22554. She'll know the number of anything. She has every apartment I've lived in, every number that is associated with it. She'll remember that. Now, that, mind you, that does keep her up. Me and my dad think keeps her sharp. She likes to, you know, keep her memory going. But it also is just a way for me and my sister to kind of, as soon as we get on the phone, it's like, what you guys dream about? What you talk about? I think I hit the lottery. It's a way for us to kind of start the conversation. It's also a way for us to kind of just like start out with just something random to really talk about. Like, I actually dreamed about something weird, or I just started and we usually can get into a lot of different conversations from that. And it usually stems a lot from our family history, because a lot of times when we start talking about that, brings up her kind of history of what, like, oh, you know what, your uncle used to do this, or so-and-so used to do this. So it kind of brings up that, but it also just starts to, like, get us on a goofy pattern. Like, we can go from talking about dreams to then, like, thinking about things on YouTube or things we saw, and it kind of gets her engaged in what we already, like, you know, our generation talks about and things like that. You know, she does watch a lot of politics, so we usually get engaged into that kind of stuff. But it does, that kind of first initiation of asking what about dreams, even though it's like for lottery numbers, for gambling, it's definitely kind of what we use to kind of get our talk with our grandmother, and she enjoys it and then engages us. We could stay on the phone for hours just talking about random stuff that really initiated from just telling her our dreams, whether, you know, it's, you know, really short or like really long and something, you know, goes into it. But it's kind of interesting how you guys are talking about how that can kind of start a conversation. It really does for our family with at least my grandmother on my dad's side. It really does. So.
That's beautiful. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, I think for all of us, you know, rushing around in New York City, it would take something to share in that way. It would certainly be bold, and I think, at least personally, I'm, you know, happily willing to be bold in that way, and to also request of others to be bold in that way. And perhaps it would be a bit uncomfortable for a moment, and sometimes, you know, the uncomfortable moments are great. So we should all be a little uncomfortable and ask each other about our dreams more. Yeah. Shall we watch some of the future filmmakers?
I love that.
Yeah. So first up we have Clayton's piece, and Clayton is here. Thanks for being here, Clayton. It's really.
Now we're going to get down to aging. Is what we're all here for, aging?
And respect and change and transparency are all very much alive in this short piece as well.
For sure, for sure.
All right, so I'm going to hit the lights. So those were 3 pieces from the Future Filmmakers Workshop, which is an intensive filmmaking program for high school students at Tisch that happens on Saturdays. And Carlos, would you share?
I'd just like to point out that Clayton is sitting right there.
So Clayton made the first piece, Detachment. Yeah, so it'd be great to. Well, first, will you share, Carlos, your history with future filmmakers?
You want to remind me? Oh, 30 years at least now, maybe 31st year. Since its inception, when I came to the Tisch School, it had been started the year before, and then since then I've had it all of this time. But the future, other than the 30 years, I mean, what strikes me, and I have to put it in the context, and the way I said earlier at the beginning of the presentation, that the future filmmakers is in fact the favorite course that I teach, and I've taught the freshman, first year, second year, and also third year courses in the film department. But the future filmmakers is in fact my favorite, the course that I teach. And perhaps it's because these youngsters, and the future film is for high school students, and it's free of charge. But at this age of average age of 16, 17, it's like they've got so much on their plates that they're trying to understand. And our approach is to get them to tell as much as possible to tell their personal stories. Once we get into that first year and the second year, it's all about Hollywood and the tricks and the this and the other. And as we have seen, 3 projects on aging. Why? And every year with the future filmmakers, we get anywhere from 2 to 3 projects that have to do with their grandparents. I never get that with the first year students, with the regular first year students, second year students, forget it, third year students, to go back. And I suspect, and I'm going to speculate now, that the relationships that the future filmmaker students have had with their grandparents over the course of, I mean, these are the grandparents who have nurtured them, and they're so close to them, and then to watch them slowly, quote unquote, deteriorating, it must be so difficult for them to understand what is going on here emotionally. For them to witness and experience this, what is going on here. And when we give them this opportunity to explore this visually, this is what we get. Perhaps.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, it's not just with the grandparents, but with, I think, well, for Clayton, it's your great aunt that you were collaborating with, yeah, and then the piano, I don't know if I remember correctly that it's a neighbor in her neighborhood, so, which is interesting, like, not just in the nuclear family, but really looking at just the elders in the community, and how, and really honoring those relationships.
Yeah. I don't know, perhaps I'd like to hear from the audience. When Clayton walked in, I said, I was just singing your praises because as far as cinematic language and visual storytelling, I think that Clayton, with that rack focus and the silhouettes and all that. Yeah, that's cinematic language, at its best. How old were you when you made this, Clayton?
17.
17?
Yeah.
Can you tell us your inspiration?
Oh, okay.
I'm so curious.
So we were in class and we were assigned a project to make a documentary. And it was the first time that we were going to have to take the equipment home on our own. And I was at home brainstorming a bunch of ideas. And I remember Ulrich had said in class to us, the best idea would be to make something or to make a film about something you know nothing about. And so my great aunt was like not like a huge part of my life when I was little, but she was around, and I used to spend the weekends at her house occasionally, or she would come up and she would babysit me. And then around the time that I was, I think 5 or 6, she was diagnosed with dementia, and then I saw her a lot less. And between around the ages of 6 and 14, she just kind of like existed, and I knew she existed, but we didn't have any interaction with each other. I didn't really see her except for maybe once or twice. We didn't talk on the phone at all. She was just kind of like this figure in our family that existed, but she was almost like a ghost. And then when I was in my freshman year, right after my parents had gotten divorced, we moved in with my great aunt, and we moved above her because it was a 2-home house. And in that time, like, it was kind of interesting to get to know her because it was almost like rediscovering a friend. But this time she was completely different because she didn't really remember who I was, and I didn't really remember anything about her. And there was like, because like it was far away from school, and so like I didn't really see my friends on the weekends, and she was home all day, and so I spent a lot of time with her and her 2 dogs. And originally, like when I had pitched the idea for the documentary, I wanted it to be about telling her life story through pictures and being this woman who came from nothing and ran away from home and made a life for herself and had 5 daughters and six daughters and created something. And then when I showed up with the camera, I ended up with this completely different idea because by the time I was in Future Filmmakers, I had moved out of Connecticut into New Jersey, and so I had been away from her for just like a year and a half, and I came back and she was different again in a way that it was like she was remembering less, and she wasn't very talkative, and she wasn't really aware of like the fact that the camera was there. But in that moment, I had this idea to tell this story of all these pictures that she has in her house of our family members, and it made me think about how in those years between ages 5 and 14, I was so detached from her, but she was so attached to me and my family through pictures. But no one goes to visit her, and no one goes to see her. And in the time that we lived with her, it was just me, my mom, and 3 of her daughters that stopped by to see her. And I mean, I was the only person that saw her consistently every day, and then everyone else would kind of pop up once a week or once a month or once every 2 months. And it's very interesting because when you talk to her, she talks about her family as if she sees them all the time, because she like her concept of time is so almost like false in a way. And so I started recording, and then I went to go edit the footage, and I realized I recorded something completely different than kind of like what I had gone there to do. And that's how, like, I guess the story came about, because it really wasn't like what I had intended to make, but it was, I think, a better story than what I wanted to tell. And I think it meant more to me, and I think it meant a lot to my family, kind of, because it was a way of telling my family, like, there's this person that none of us would be here without, and we all know she exists, but we just act like she doesn't. So, yeah.
I have another question for you, if
Oh, okay.
that's okay. I'm wondering. So So the grandma's fudge piece that Alex made is from the same year. Clay and Alex were classmates, and I wonder, was there any moment for you two where it was like, oh, we're like exploring something similar, or
Kind of, because of, I think the moment happened because of like the way we were split into crews, and so Alex and I were both Group C, so we took the cameras home last, and we pitched our ideas at the same time, and I remember like there being this like very quick discussion of like, I remember Arik said to us, don't use like elders in your family just to use elders in your family, because you have to remember that they're still people and you have to handle them with care, and that they're not like test subjects for your films. And I remember Alex and I having this like very quick conversation, or trying to like decipher what he meant, because when he said it, it was much more like cryptic. And I remember Alex and I being like, so like what do we do, and like what do we not do? Because you don't like, in your head, like obviously like you have an idea and then you go there and it's gonna play out differently, but you don't want to be like, no, like do this or act this way, and like kind of like remembering that like you can direct them but don't like tell them to do things. And I think like we kind of had this conversation about like respect, and like respect for our elders, and like how we were gonna approach like telling that, and then also just kind of like why we picked the stories that we did. And like I wanted to do my great aunt because like it was a person in my life who was really important that I got to spend a lot of time with and I got to rediscover. And Alex wanted to do her grandma and her fudge because I don't remember what the exact reason was, but I think it was her grandma lives with her, and like that was a very recent thing that had happened in their family, and so that was like a new family dynamic for her of having another person in the house. And she like kind of talked about it like as if she was 5 again, because it was like her grandma was cooking for her and like baking cookies and making fudge, and like those are things that you do like when you go to your grandma's house, but now your grandma lives with you. So I think she wanted to kind of in a way showcase like the new relationship and new family dynamic that she has, because there was a new person in her house, and it was a person that she knew, but it almost felt like rediscovering her grandma because it was seeing her in a different setting in a way.
Thanks, Clay. Clay and I, it's interesting, we've also talked about like how unique the Future Filmmakers classroom is, because we have myself and Carlos, who are many years apart, and Ulrich Brown, Professor Ulrich Brown, who's like Chris in the middle somewhere, and Ed Parada in the middle somewhere, and then these young, teenage people and artists. And I almost wish like it feels like a powerful group, like the different perspectives, and I almost wish we could like it's the dynamic and the work that gets produced is incredible, but I wonder like what if we just made a film together, like with those different minds and perspectives, and like what would come of that. Could be very interesting. Yeah.
You made a film.
I made a film. I would like to show it. So I had a thought earlier that I wanted to share, which is that in terms of talking about my work as well. So this project of having people make almost video art pieces as an extension of Amanier about respect, change, and transparency. You don't know this actually, Carlos, but I've been doing something different, but a little bit similar. And I'm working on my first feature film right now, which is very exciting. And it's a documentary and narrative hybrid, and it's about wilderness retreat for a group of queer women of color that's happening in August, and we're going to be doing transformational work and healing work and, you know, looking at any traumas we've experienced and creating a safe container to process that and do that work. And part of the retreat, we're doing like performance art pieces as well. That's the more structured narrative bit. And so I'm giving cameras to the participants on the retreat with like prompts and having them film themselves and film each other. So what struck me, and I think is just interesting, sort of with these cameras that we all have, but then under like a unified prompt and direction, and almost, you know, it's a way to play also what's possible out of that. So that was on my mind earlier. And so then this piece here, oh, and then I'll also add, in terms of future filmmakers, students, every year making, you know, a number of students have work about elders in their communities. It's really striking, like year after year, like you're saying. And even, so I was in Future Filmmakers when I was in high school in 2010, a senior in high school, and I made a piece about my grandmother that I think it's like lost in like the cyber matrix somewhere. I wish it weren't, but I think probably I don't think I saved it properly at the time, which now we like hammer the students with like save this properly and make sure you bring a drive and take your work. But yeah, I made a piece about my grandmother, but I remember it very clearly. It was about all the medications she was on, and it was about like 20 different medications that she was taking, and one for this and that, and then the side effect of this, and it was what I was processing in making that with her and about her was just the pain and watching that deterioration and frustration, and also compassion and sympathy. So yeah, and yeah, my grandmother actually recently passed away in October. Her name was Lulu. And my feature film is very much inspired by her and dedicated to her, so that feels really exciting to be working on. And so this short piece here that I made, it's called My Third Eye, and you know, as it relates to aging, it comes from this place of feeling very old in a sense. And you know, was trauma that I experienced, sexual abuse in my life at a very young age, and that created a sort of aging of the spirit, maybe not the body, but definitely of the spirit, and sort of different perspective and different kind of wisdom that comes with that. And so in reflecting on that and memory and my childhood self, I wrote and directed this short, and so I'll play it now, and then we can just hear any reflections or questions. Thanks. So any questions or comments? I can, what more can I share? Well, I think too, you know, it's been such an amazing experience working with future filmmakers, and you know, I laugh sometimes because like when I'm working alongside Carlos and Ulrich and Ed, and I'm sharing with the students, you know, this guidance, and sometimes I'm even like, where's this wisdom coming from? It's like as I'm teaching, I'm learning so much, or being like represenced to what it means to put moving images together, and like it's pretty remarkable. Just even a creative experience in and of itself, and with the future filmmakers students making these silent pieces, you know, that this was really a direct influence and of working on the students' projects and sculpting them, and looking at, you know, what it means to not have sound, and then how does that impact how we're telling the story visually, really allowed me to construct this story in a way that was really empowering and effective, I think. So, yeah.
Is that a form of exorcism?
Exorcism, yes, yeah, definitely. And with this new documentary, you know, in a similar way as this, is taking these like painful lived experiences and infusing like surrealism and magic and liberation, and we're going to be having this group of queer women and non-binary people of color on this farm in Pennsylvania. We're going to be shooting, there's this mountain and acres of land, and we're going to be, you know, really diving deep into traumatic experiences that we've had, and then reenacting and recreating them, but in ways that, you know, we have agency and that infuse our creative spirits and surrealism, and so that we get to tell these stories and have this exorcism happen in a way that's definitely will be tough, but also fun and liberating and playful. So that's what I'm committed to in my work, and to continuing that.
Right. So I think that's certainly one of my aims. Other uses of filmmaking, other uses other than what we get from Hollywood, and certainly outside of Hollywood, and we don't see those films here, but there are other uses that are being put to filmmaking, again, other than the violence and the cut to the chase that we get from Hollywood. Was it you who took me to see Black Panther, Shelley?
Certainly was.
And I was absolutely shocked. You know how they have the previews for the upcoming films, and I was just shocked to see that if there were 5 or 6 previews of coming films, they were every single one of them was kind of like structured, if you will, exactly like Black Panther, and the violence and the bombs and the cut to the chase. Nothing that I have any use for, but that's what's making the bucks. That's what's in the mainstream.
So do I have 5 minutes to guide a meditation, Luis? If that's okay with you all, if you'll Great. Just check, looking at the time. So we'll close with this meditation. And I'm 25, and it's interesting. I would consider myself a veteran meditator of sorts at this point. I meditate very, very rigorously and have done a number of courses and different types of meditation, and it's such an incredible tool to connect to, in one sense, our most creative selves. So we'll set an intention here that as we're closing our eyes and tuning in, that we're greeting ourselves with gratitude and love. And then you're also welcome to just sit in your chair. So if you'll close your eyes and take a deep breath in and out. And another deep breath in. And out. Feel the weight of your body in the chair as you take a deep breath in and out. Allow your body to sink into the chair and feel how supported your bottom is by the chair and the ground below you. Feel how your feet are supported by the solid ground, how your back is supported by the chair. And as you take a deep breath in and out, allow yourself to relax more deeply in the chair. Notice any tension in your body. Maybe your neck. Just allow yourself to let the tension dissolve. Any tension, tightness behind your eyes. With your breath, just let it dissolve. Any other tension in your face or your shoulders. Just feel it melting away with each deep breath that you take. Allow your breath to slow down. Thank your lungs as they fill with air. And release. Notice any tension in your hips or your back. And just let it dissolve with your breath. Scanning your lower body and your thighs, your knees. With your next deep breath, just let it dissolve. And find yourself sitting somewhere, anywhere that you're comfortable, somewhere that you like. It could be outdoors or indoors. A space that you really cherish. Observe what's around you, the details, what's underfoot. You could be walking around or just sitting, just appreciating the environment. And as you explore this environment with your eyes and your other senses, with your hands, maybe picking things up, noticing what you smell, how things feel, just really appreciating this space and what it has to offer you. Noticing little details that bring a smile to your face. And as you move through this space and notice these details, you're greeted by a version of yourself, either a very young version or a very old version. A beautiful reflection of your highest self. What do you notice about this expression? What are they wearing? How do they look? And as you look at them with love and gratitude and respect, what do you notice in their form and their movement? What lessons have you learned from them? What lessons have you shared with them? And as you reach over and put your arms around them and give them a hug, a deep and loving embrace, you thank them for this lesson, whatever it may be. Whatever this lesson may be, it's filled with love. As we breathe in that lesson and that love, we say thank you and see you later to this expression of ourself. And we bring our presence to our bodies and the weight of our bodies in our chair, and the weight of our bodies and our feet on the ground, and our deep breath. And as we represence ourselves in our chair, can give a little wiggle, a little stretch, and then open our eyes when we're ready. Thank you.
On a more mundane note, I would like to thank you both for a very enjoyable and provocative evening, and our appreciation for your effort and your insight.
Thank you very much.
And I thank the audience for attending. We've enjoyed having you here, and I would like to just have a final thank you to Tish for the support and their help in scheduling and promoting this event and the earlier events that we've had in collaboration with Tish. In particular, I'd like to thank Dean Allison Green and Chief of Staff Joan Monego, and also would like to thank Maureen Fitzgerald, who's an avid member of our Aging Incubator Network, and her team at the Cantor Film Center for their help with the space and the setup for this evening. Without all your cooperation and attendance and enthusiasm, these events wouldn't be happening, and we're looking forward to having more in the coming year. Thank you.
Thank you.